When the price changes, your real income also changes. Some of you may have already seen this same sheet before. There's a parallel shift between two different curves is known as income. I can show you afterwards. So there are 4 market structures, one of which is known as oligopoly. An oligopoly is a market structure with a few firms. Why are there a few firms? Because there's some sort of barrier to entry. The same barriers to entry that apply to a monopoly, they could be legal barriers to entry, they could be economies of scale, also known as natural barriers to entry. They could be a control of resources based barrier to entry. Because there are just a few firms, which is a result of barriers to entry, the key feature of oligopolies is that the firms are interdependent. Interdependent meaning each firm's actions affect its rivals' actions. Or you can think of it the other way. Each firm looks at its rival's actions when thinking of a strategy. This can be a strategy with relation to price, with relation to output, with relation to marketing strategies. So therefore, we use game theory, which is a different tool to help us analyze this interdependence in oligopolies. For basic first year, we make some assumptions. First, which is there are just two players, and each firm has two choices. Therefore, there are four possible outcomes. Because there are just two firms and just two choices per firm, we have four possible outcomes. Now, that's just for our purposes with first year micro. But you can do it with three firms and three choices, or four firms and three choices, or that's all in second year, right? Yeah, which you're all going to enroll in as your elective. Yeah? That'll be more fun, right? And third year. Yeah? And masters. You can even just do a whole PhD, which is Mr. John Nash, who just passed away. His PhD was game theory. He came up with the idea. Okay? So, two players, two choices, four possible outcomes. The classic example is something called a prisoner's dilemma. You'll see why it's called a prisoner's dilemma. There are two firms, or two people, two individuals, two countries. It's two anything, right? Game theory is used to analyze defense tactics for two countries, two firms, two companies, Coles and Woolworths, two individuals, in this case, two criminals. They've been caught committing a crime. They've been isolated in a police station. The two have been separated, and they have a choice to confess to committing the crime or deny. If they both confess, the -10 is indicative of them both going to jail for 10 years. If they both deny, they each go to jail for just a single year. If one confesses and one denies, the denier, i.e. the liar, gets punished, goes to jail for 20 years, and the confessor gets a reward for telling the truth, and they don't go to jail at all. Is that okay? So, the two have been separated. That's to model the fact that in the real world, it's illegal for firms to communicate with each other. Collusion, or forming a cartel. Collusion, or cartel activity. These are all illegal. And in Australia, the ACCC, which is the Australian Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, is responsible for looking into possible collusive behavior or cartel behavior by firms. So the fact that we've separated these two prisoners is to model that aspect. Again, each does not know what the other can do, what the other will choose. So let's look at all possible guesses. Now, the key to game theory is the way you approach it. You've got to approach two cells at a time. So you literally need to cover two cells at a time. See, I'm looking at Ned confess. So therefore, I covered Ned deny. Can you see what I've done? I've ignored Ned deny because all I'm looking at is Ned confessing. The colors are important. So Ned is in green, Kelly is in red. If Ned confesses and Kelly confesses, Kelly will go to jail for 10 years. If Kelly denies, he will go to jail for 20. Is that okay? The way we analyze it, you can probably add it to your list of assumptions. We assume that each player chooses their best given what the other player has already chosen. So add that to your list of assumptions. Each player chooses the best move given what the other player has already chosen. The best move for them, by considering the outcome for them. So what's better, minus 10 or minus 20? Minus 10. So if Ned confesses, Kelly will choose to confess as well. Why? Because minus 10 is bigger than minus 20. The second possibility is that Ned will deny. So now I cover the other two boxes of Ned confessing. If Ned denies, Kelly will choose to possibly confess and not go to jail at all, or to deny and go to jail for 1 year. In this case, what's better? 0 or minus 1? 0, right? So Kelly will choose to confess, since 0 is bigger than minus 1. Now, as you can see, regardless of Ned's choice, Kelly chooses to confess, regardless. We call this a dominant strategy. A dominant strategy is a strategy that you choose regardless of what the other player chooses. So Kelly will choose to confess regardless of what Ned chooses. Is that okay? Okay. We've looked at it from Kelly's point of view. Now we look at it from Ned's point of view. If Kelly confesses, what should Ned do? What color is Ned? Green. Minus 10 or minus 20? Which one is better? Minus 10. So Ned will choose to confess because minus 10 is bigger than minus 20. If Kelly denies, what should Ned do? Ned is green. He simply looks at what's best for him, given that Kelly has already denied. 0 is better than minus 1. Ned will confess. Does Ned have a dominant strategy? Yes, because dominant strategy is if your choice is the same regardless of what the other player chooses. You don't just say Ned has a dominant strategy, you say Ned has a dominant strategy to confess. So don't just leave it at dominant strategy, you would say Ned has a dominant strategy to confess. So the procedure is you've got to write the 4 lines like this. Analyze each possible move and then the possible reaction by the other player. You've got to write the 4 lines out. You can't just look at the grid to find the Nash equilibrium. Ned will definitely confess. Kelly will definitely confess. So we say that both players confessing is our Nash equilibrium. Both players confessing, we call this the Nash equilibrium. A Nash equilibrium, technically defined, would be each player chooses their best strategy given what the other player has already chosen, and neither has an incentive to change their move. Each player chooses the best strategy given what the other player has already chosen, and neither player has an incentive to change their move. This is what I mean by change their move. Let's say we're already here, but then Kelly suddenly changes to deny. If he did, then he will go to jail for 20 years. So does Kelly have an incentive to change his move? No. If Ned suddenly decides to deny, Ned will go to jail for 20 years. Does Ned have an incentive to change his move? No. So Nash equilibrium, each player chooses what is best for them given what the other has already chosen, and neither has an incentive to change. Sounds very technical, right? Now, the interesting thing about this game is that the best outcome for them had they worked together? Had they worked together, what would they have chosen? They would have both chosen to deny. Had they worked together. Had they both worked together, they would have chosen to deny. We call this the collusive or cooperative outcome. Had they worked together. How did we prevent them from achieving the collusive or cooperative outcome? How did we prevent them from achieving the collusive or cooperative outcome? By not allowing them to communicate with each other. By not allowing them to communicate, we prevented them from getting what was best for them. Agree? In this situation, because the Nash equilibrium is different to the collusive outcome, because the Nash equilibrium is different to the collusive outcome, we call it a prisoner's dilemma. The definition of a prisoner's dilemma is when the Nash and the collusive outcomes are different. All good? Yeah. Some of you have already done it. I'll give you 2 minutes if you haven't. Can you have a go at game 1 the same way? So in an exam situation, you'd obviously not get these 4 lines, but that's the way you should approach it, right? All you'll get is the matrix, and you need to approach it systematically like this. Looking at the matrix would be wrong, because looking at the matrix gives you the collusive outcome, not the Nash equilibrium. Because when you look at the whole thing, you work out what's best for both of them when they work together. Whereas the 4 lines is each one is doing it independently of the other and simply reacting to what the other has chosen. So this involves covering 2 at a time, yeah? So if Coles advertises, which 2 cells should I cover? The 2 cells I should cover is Coles, not advertising, yeah? Because Coles, we said advertises. Woolworths then looks at a choice to advertise and go with 30, a choice to not advertise and go with 10. Now, this involves you forcing yourself to ignore the numbers in red, right? Because Woolworths is green, we simply look at the numbers that are in green. Woolworths will choose to advertise because 30 is more than 10. Woolworths will choose to advertise because 30 is more than 10. If Coles does not advertise, which 2 cells should I cover? The advertised ones, because now we're saying Coles does not. Woolworths is advertised, take 20. Woolworths does not advertise, take 10. What's better? Advertise and take 20. Does Woolworths have a dominant strategy? What is the definition of a dominant strategy? If you choose the same thing regardless of what the other did, right? So you would say, you would write, Woolworths has a dominant strategy to advertise. You would write, Woolworths has a dominant strategy to advertise. If Woolworths advertises now, what cells should I cover? The bottom 2. If Woolworths advertises, Coles looks at advertising and taking 30 or not advertising and taking 10. 30 is more than 10. So Coles will go with advertise. If Woolworths does not advertise, Coles can advertise and take 30 or not advertise and take 20. 30 is bigger. Coles will choose to advertise. Does Coles have a dominant strategy? Which is, Coles has a dominant strategy to advertise. So, we know that Coles will definitely advertise. We know that Woolworths will definitely advertise. What's the Nash equilibrium? They both will choose to advertise. We'll call that the Nash equilibrium. You would simply just say, both firms advertising is the Nash equilibrium. Yeah. It's a good question. You would just write a sentence saying, both firms advertising is the Nash equilibrium. The number in the cell is irrelevant actually. Both firms advertising is the Nash equilibrium. What if they colluded and worked together? What would they have chosen? So this is what we got when they didn't work together, right? What if they actually worked together? They would choose the same thing, right? Because that's the cell that has the highest number for both. So if they work together, they would have actually chosen the same thing. So it's actually the collusive equilibrium as well in this case. In this example, they are the same thing. Is it therefore a prisoner's dilemma? No. Because a prisoner's dilemma is defined as when they don't match. In this case, whether they worked independently or whether they worked together would have resulted in the same outcome. Amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Yes?
When you work out the Nash equilibrium and the numbers will be the same or will they be different?
They can be different, yes. It only depends on your analysis here. What the number is inside is actually irrelevant afterwards. After writing the 4 lines, ignore the numbers and simply look at what you've written. The Nash equilibrium simply depends on the moves that you have already analyzed. The numbers have already been taken into account. Yeah? So when deciding the Nash equilibrium, simply look at all the possible moves and counter moves. Yeah? So, in an exam it will look like this because you won't have the 4 lines written out, right? So, I guess good practice is as soon as you see something like that, write everything out. Calls research, what will happen next? Calls does not research, what will happen next? Woolworths researches, what will happen next? Woolworths does not research, what will happen next? So if you get into the habit of just doing that straight away, you actually help yourselves. Okay, if Coles researches, what will Woolworths choose? To research, because 20 is more than 30. Because 20 is more than 10. Yeah? If Coles does not research, Woolworths will choose research because 30 is more than 20. Does Woolworths have a dominant strategy? Yes. Woolworths has a dominant strategy to conduct research because the strategy is the same. What if Woolworths does research? What will Coles do? Coles will choose research because 20 is more than 10. What if Woolworths chooses not to research? Coles will choose not to because 30 is more than 20. Does Coles have a dominant... What am I writing?